Welcome to your favorite horror storyteller. This video contains several scary stories. Please watch it to the end. There are time codes at the bottom if you want to switch the story. Also, I'm grateful for your support and advice. Thank you. Let's get started. This story would have nothing to do with computers in general and high technologies in particular, if its beginning had not been directly connected with my habit of sitting at night in ICQ, communicating with acquaintances. I have always considered night conversations more fruitful. And frank, not without that. When the network is empty at night, the interlocutor has much more time to talk to you than during the day, when he can be distracted at any moment by work, a phone call, or a proposal for lunch. This is unlikely to happen at night, so I opted for nighttime communication and started intentionally coming online closer to midnight, staying in touch until morning. This continued until the following happened. A few years ago, I can't say exactly, I just remember that I didn't have a cat at the time, which I regret. It would have been easier with a cat. I was sitting at my computer as usual. There was only one companion left online. The others had long since gone to bed. It was almost 4 o'clock in the morning. I had just thrown a funny picture to an acquaintance, waited for a reaction, and did not expect anyone to push the doorknob. In silence. I jumped off the computer chair, looked apprehensively at the door, but didn't dare to go near it. The thing is, my door, though iron, is still not very strong. When neighbors come to my house, it shakes as if it were about to fly out. Besides, its thickness is not very pleasing either. Once we decided to save money, bought one of the cheapest doors and installed it second. The first gate to the house was a wooden door that stood there when we bought the apartment. We thought we had a great idea, however. At one not-so-great moment, the wooden door came down to the laminate flooring so that it couldn't be opened with keys. We had to break it down, and after that, the only defense of the apartment was a thin and cheap metal one. And who would push the handle at night? The neighbors in the 4-unit apartment block would have called. Besides, if any of them had left their apartment, I would have heard. The neighbors in the entryway wouldn't be able to get past the door leading from the elevators and stairs. There's protection from the street, too. A door with a code lock. Gosh, who the hell could it be? Meanwhile, the handle kept going up and down, like in a station restroom where someone who's been in a hurry for a long time breaks in. The comparison seems ridiculous, yes, but that's only now, when it came to my mind in the bright office. Back then at night, I couldn't laugh. I looked at the bouncing handle in horror and didn't understand why the person who was breaking in couldn't at least knock. Why the mockery of the door? I texted my friend. Imagine some asshole wants to come in. He doesn't knock, he doesn't call. He just presses the knob like a zombie and doesn't say anything. It's been a long time. I've pressed it 20 times and it won't go away. A friend said, "It's very scary. I'll go see who it is. In the meantime, write me something funny, please." After that, I went to the door. There was no response to the "Hey, who's there?" call. I peered through the peephole and was stunned. Almost the entire landing was perfectly visible. I could see the neighbor's door, their baby stroller, and the door leading to the elevators. There was no one alive there. No one. The knob, however, kept fluttering. I was frightened, returned to the computer, told everything as it is, and suggested that my friend synchronously run some movie. In no case, not a horror movie. We have such a tradition. To find in the network site cinema, choose a movie, turn it on, and discuss in ICQ. It creates almost a complete feeling that we have been to the movies together. When I had already started the movie, at medium volume, so as not to wake the neighbors, and the sounds coming from the door drown out, it seemed to me that I made a mistake. My quiet, "Who's there?" It may not have heard, but the voice reading the names of the actors heard for sure. But it was too late to turn off the movie. I wasn't sure I could stay in silence again. For 10 minutes, I looked back periodically at the door. The knob twitched less and less, until finally it fell silent. I decided to go to bed that night, however, only when it was quite light in the room and rare passers-by crawled out into the street. I hoped it was over. The next night was Sunday through Monday, so I went to bed early. I thought that when I went to sleep at 4 a.m. and had my 10th dream,
even in the event that yesterday's dabbling with the pen happened again. I would hear nothing, sleep peacefully, and wake up only in the morning on my alarm clock. Oh yeah.
Last night I had one of those dreams that aren't really dreams. The ones where you wake up realizing that something creepy is lurking somewhere near you and turning on the light is just vital. I've often dreamed before that I wake up in the stuffy darkness, run to the light switch, the light doesn't come on, and I open the front door while still half asleep, with my brain almost shut off, to see if it's just my apartment without light, or if it's a universal disaster. That night it happened again. I woke up, as if gasping for breath, rushed to light the chandelier, but it had no effect. Out of habit, I went to the front door, ready to turn the key, and suddenly, I was wary remembering last night. Instead of looking out the door, I looked through the peephole. At first I thought it was as dark as the house, but after a few seconds, something moved behind the door, and a light edge appeared in the peephole. That meant that there was nothing wrong with the lamps in the hallway, but my peephole was being blocked. Someone, or something. The knob twitched with renewed vigor. Like last night, nothing disturbed the silence, and I was creeped out by that fact alone. Though I guess if I'd heard a zombie moaning from behind the door, it wouldn't have made me feel any better. I carefully stepped away from the door, lay down on the couch with my phone in my hands, and tried to disconnect, as if nothing was happening. It was happening, of course. It was happening. In addition to yesterday's tugging on the knob, there was a measured, muffled tapping. To think that yesterday, I almost wished that the person standing at the door would not only pull the knob, but also knock. It must have been very quiet, but it seemed to me eerily loud. I had the impression that the neighbors to the left and right should also wake up from this knocking and come out into the corridor to curse either me or the one who was knocking on my door late at night, not letting anyone sleep. After a while, I remembered that I had bought earplugs during the day. I wasn't used to them. I had never used them before, so I didn't think about them right away. I found them in my bag by touch and immediately put them in my ears. The knocking immediately became something almost non-existent to me, something I could ignore. Without trying to turn on the light again, I lay down and soon fell asleep. In the morning, I would have thought I was dreaming. There were no more light outages. Everything was working properly, if it hadn't been for the earplugs in my ears, which of course hadn't gone anywhere overnight. All day at work, I was not myself. I even wanted to go to my brother's house, to my friends, to someone else. But by the evening, I decided not to impose on anyone, especially since it would be difficult to explain the reason why I did not want to spend the night at home on a weekday. I couldn't sleep at night. I didn't even try. I prepared for the night as if I were in for a long, exhausting siege. I put a flashlight next to me and stocked up on salt, just in case. The monster-fighting horror movies repeatedly claimed it was a defense against monsters, though I didn't believe it would help. I put a stool and a dresser against the door, anything that wasn't so heavy that it couldn't be dragged by hand, and waited. That night it didn't start with a knock or a twitch of the knob. The doorbell was her hero. I must say that once my doorbell used to play 8 different melodies, but after several years of use, something in it broke. Now in its repertoire was only a hoarse rattling, remotely resembling the original melody. That day the bell definitely decided to recall its youth, blasting the silence of the apartment, sounding like the day we first installed the bell. After the 5th ring, accompanied by scratching at the door, about 3 times louder than a cat would do, I couldn't stand it and peered through the peephole again. I wish I hadn't. Last night the peephole had shown nothing but flickering shadows. Now the night visitor stood a little farther away, and I could see his face clearly. It was white, like the maggots that sometimes breed in rotten potatoes. I could also see that he was moving as if jerkily, but very fast. The worst of it was that he demonstrated his speed by rushing to the peephole, as if he realized that I was watching him. The worst of it was his eyes, which were like black holes. I inadvertently peered through the peephole as he approached, and it was as if I had fallen somewhere for a few seconds. When I surfaced, I found that I had already turned the key in the lock. If I hadn't double-locked this night, which I usually only do when I leave my apartment, the door would have swung open. I was shaking. I pushed the stool to the door again, which I also kicked away, trying to unlock the guest as soon as possible. And on woozy legs, I went into the kitchen to the balcony door. That's how I sat until dawn. At that time, it seemed to me very important to check that nothing could get into the house through the balcony. Besides, the balcony door in my small apartment is the farthest from the front door, which I knew I wouldn't be able to get past until morning. As I was leaving the apartment the next day, a neighbor stopped me and said reproachfully, "You think you're the smartest one? You boiled shrimp and put the bag of shrimp tails and heads out in the hallway overnight so you wouldn't smell them at home? Don't do that again." I smelled something in the corridor, not the musty water from the aquarium which had not been changed for a long time, not the shrimp peelings, which had been thrown out in time, so they had been at home for a few days. When the neighbor disappeared behind her door, I tried to find other traces of yesterday's presence of the creature in the vestibule. The smell was quite tangible. Maybe there would be a couple of other tangible evidences. And indeed, when I looked closely at the right side of the door, where the most scratching had come from the day before, I saw 4 scratches. Thin, not the kind you can cut with a knife, except with a blade. But a blade wouldn't cut that deep into the door trim, almost to the metal. That was the last straw. I took a day off work, called the priest home, and asked him to consecrate both the apartment and the vestibule for 4 apartments. I wanted him to consecrate the area in front of the elevators, but he looked at me so amazed. "What do you need that for?" I had to give up the idea. Since then, the nights are quiet, but I still keep holy water at home, and when darkness comes, I listen to every rustle, especially behind the doors. After the priest's visit, I installed a second steel door the same day and changed the paneling on the first one. Even though those scratches were almost invisible on the dark brown leather, the fact that they were there was very unnerving. Now I'm at work. That's why I was able to tell you all this. I get home late, so I prefer not to remember this story there. As if by not remembering, I automatically cross out everything that happened. Sometimes I ponder why it came to me in the first place. The only thing that comes to mind is that it was attracted by the glowing window, a sign that someone else is awake in this room. Perhaps the light in night windows acts like a beacon and attracts not only night moths, but something worse. Who knows what might be peering through your window at night while you're sitting online, chatting with 1 or 2 friends while all your other contacts are offline. Remember that, okay? And take care of yourself. Don't stay online too long at night, or at least by thick, impenetrable curtains. I've been thinking a lot lately. Maybe it wasn't the holy water that did it. Maybe it was just another window burning late at night. My father and I lived in a 2-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. My mother died when I was 12 years old. My relatives lived in another city. Times were quite difficult, and my father worked 2 jobs to support himself and me. So I got used to him coming home pretty late. One evening I was sitting at the computer listening to music as usual. At some point I was attracted by a vague noise coming from the kitchen. I looked at the clock. It was the beginning of the first hour, which was the time my father usually got home from work. Cranking up the volume, I called out, "Dad, you?" There was no response, but the noise in the kitchen was repeated. It sounded like someone opening the refrigerator, then closing it. Then footsteps sounded and everything went quiet. Figuring my dad hadn't heard, I turned the music back on and continued to sit. An hour or so passed and I was beginning to peck my nose, but then my cell phone rang. I looked at the phone and was surprised. It was my father calling. Not understanding why he would do that if he was already home, I answered it. My dad said he wouldn't be in today. He was held up on the night shift, so he wouldn't be back until morning. I swallowed, said, "Okay," and hung up. Immediately rushing to the door of the room, I slammed it shut. I put the hook on it just in case. Turning off the music, I listened, but the kitchen was quiet. After a while, I decided to go out for a reconnaissance. The first thing I did was to check the front door. It was locked.
Then I turned on the light in the hallway and went to the kitchen. The kitchen door was closed. I crept quietly to it and put my ear to it. It was quiet at first, but then I heard a vague scraping sound and a low sniffle. I picked up the mop in the hallway and held it out in front of me, pulling on the handle with the tip. The door didn't move. Then I pushed it open as hard as I could and almost flew into the kitchen. I rushed to the light switch and turned on the light. The kitchen was empty. Everything was just as it had been the last time I'd been here. I calmed down a little, thinking I was imagining things, and turned around to leave. At that moment, the light bulb behind me exploded, showering me with splinters. And then there was a shrill, high-pitched scream, more like a squeal. Something warm against my back, but I was already running for my room. I slammed the door shut, threw the hook on, and pushed the nightstand next to me for safety. My heart was pounding like a madman. My legs felt woozy and barely obeyed me. I made my way to the bed and collapsed on it, listening. The door was silent. I tried to dial my father's number, but there was no answer. I lay like that for almost an hour, but eventually I fell asleep. In the morning, my father woke me up when he came home from work. The first thing I asked him was how he had gotten into the room, to which he replied that the door was open. The dresser with the clothes on it had been pushed to the corner of the room. Stammering, I told him everything. We went to the kitchen, but found nothing but shards of a light bulb. My father, seeing my condition, said nothing. We moved out the same day to some acquaintances and did not return to the apartment until my father found someone to barter with, and we went to get our things. The apartment looked like a bunch of alcoholics had frolicked in it for a week straight. Wallpaper was ripped off, everything was torn and tattered. The refrigerator in the kitchen was upside down and all its contents were gathered in the far corner. We went to the neighbors, but they said it had been quiet and they hadn't heard anything. We hastily gathered up what survived and carried it to the car and just threw the rest away. The next day, my father gave the new owners the keys and warned them what had happened. They only laughed in response. I don't know how they got on, but they didn't call us afterwards.
I live in a one-room apartment. Our house is 9 floors high. It's very shabby. It's been without repairs for a year, but it's better to live alone in a dump than with my parents. I study at the institute. On vacations, I sometimes arrange parties. So it was winter vacation. The neighbors had left. The house was half empty. In the morning after another party, I escorted my friends out and went to bed myself because I had a sleepless night behind me. I should say that the apartment was inherited from my grandmother, had not been repaired, and was equipped with very characteristic equipment. A 3-programmer, a wooden floor lamp, and a red, thick plastic disc phone, to which no one had called since her death. Even the number was not mistaken. It stood on the nightstand beside the bed. I woke up to the ringing of this phone. My head hurts. I look at the clock, 22:15. It's already dark outside. My mind is reeling with a list of words for such an ill-timed caller. Hello? I pick up the heavy receiver. A slight crackle is heard on the other side of the wire. It's just static. Well, who do you need? There is a slight click, like an old toggle switch, and a new sound, hissing. I feel a little uneasy. Then the hissing starts to grow. It's followed by a gurgling or whistling sound. Answer me! What is it? I completely lose control and jump out of bed. The noise becomes more and more intrusive. The receiver falls back into place with a pathetic clatter. I try to catch my breath, and I notice something strange. The hissing wasn't just coming from the phone. It's spreading throughout the apartment. I gather my willpower, jump out of bed, and run to the light switch. The room lights up with the steady glow of an energy-saving bulb. It feels a little lighter, but still not particularly. Outside the window is an impenetrable, murderous blackness. I go out into the corridor and feel that the whistling and gurgling have intensified, have become closer. My spatial orientation has been very poor since childhood, so only now I recognize the place where the noise is coming from. It's my combined bathroom. I realize with a sinking heart that it's better not to look inside. I carefully close the door on the outer latch. Yes, some geniuses screwed it on the outside, not the inside.
turn on the light in the kitchen too. I bounce back with a shriek. A black short silhouette flashes in front of me. I looked again, ready to faint. There was nothing, just the sickening, brain-crushing gurgling sound of water that made me want to put my fingers in my ears. I'm shaking. I go back to my room, look back at the window. There's nothing there because it's the 8th floor, just darkness. I pick up the phone and dial the number of a friend who lives nearby. I stop. Something's not right here. I hang up and pick up again. No dial tone, pure silvery silence in the receiver, and an unbearable hissing outside, behind which I suddenly begin to hear another, new sound. It's a moan. In just a tank top and pajama pants, I jump out of the apartment, lock it with a single lock, and run up the stairs. The only thought in my head is, don't leave. It's snowing quietly in the courtyard, the streetlights burning. Latecomers see me off with their eyes, and I run away from the house, from the noise and whistling that follows me. I run out onto the avenue and remember my way to my friend's house. My friend meets me half-dressed with an equally half-dressed disgruntled guy in the background. I fall into her arms and start sobbing. I sob for half an hour at least, then find myself in bed and suddenly fall asleep. I stay at my friend's house for 2 more days, unable to process what happened. 2 days later, my parents returned. They told me a story so chilling that it made me sick. They visited my apartment. The entire bathroom and kitchen were flooded with hot water, which was coming almost from the ceiling. Immediately, they shut off the riser pipe and broke down the door of the apartment above. The apartment was breathing steam, the wallpaper and linoleum peeled off and wrinkled. But that wasn't the worst part. There was the smell of fresh meat broth everywhere. An elderly neighbor was found in the bathroom. She had died of burns and painful shock. The boiled meat had almost separated from the bones and clogged the drain, causing a flood. We eventually sold the apartment, and now I live with my parents, and am terribly afraid of water. It would seem that everything is simple. They blamed an accident at the thermal power plant, which caused a shower of boiling water that killed the poor old woman. But 2 facts still do not give me peace. In the apartment of the neighbor does not have a single phone, and mine, as it turned out, had been disconnected for a year for non-payment.